Okay, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so we have a very, very important thing. Okay, we have to make a distinction between three separate ideas. Okay, three separate ideas. One is, or actually, there's two discussions, three ideas, and then a distinction between doing and not doing. So, a distinction between something that is am, something that is mutlaq, and something that is mujmal. Okay? Am means, Muhammad, where are you from again? You're from Tunisia?
Yes.
Tunisia. So you say, I hate all Tunisians. Okay. So if I say, I hate all Tunisians, therefore, you're saying you hate Muhammad. That's what you're saying. Period. Right? Muhammad Amin is a Tunisian. Therefore, so that is inclusive. That's an am. Right? I like Tunisians. That means you like him. Right? I like chocolate. That includes burnt chocolate, chocolate that it tastes disgusting, chocolate that's been thrown off a cliff, chocolate that's rotten. Right? Linguistically, you're including all of these things. Okay? I don't like chocolate. That means all chocolate, any kind of chocolate, even chocolate that if you ate it, you get you to Jannah. You don't like that as well. That's what it means linguistically. Okay? So we can come along and start cutting away at your statement with other things. Well, you like Muhammad Amin, so therefore you must like him. Yeah, that's true. Well, you didn't like this chocolate, did you? Oh, that's true, right? So we can start cutting away at this thing with external evidence, but the statement itself is what's called universal, all inclusive. It is am, right? And al-umum min awarid al-alfaz, all inclusivity, all inclusiveness, generality is something that is peculiar and unique to words. Okay, peculiar and unique to words. I believe I mentioned this before. Now we come along to the mutlaq, right? And you say something like فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ, free a slave. I didn't say free all slaves. I said free a slave, meaning any slave. So that's mutlaq. So mutlaq is not the same as am, okay? Which is also different to mujmal. Mujmal is vague, okay? Do something good that will, something specific that I'll mention to you in a second that will pay for your sin. Do something specific that I'll mention to you in a second that will pay will cover up for your sin. Well, what is that? Right? There's a particular thing in my pocket that I'm not going to tell you about. I don't know what that is. So that's called mujmal. So mujmal is I don't have enough information to know what it is. Okay? So when I said I don't like Tunisians, that included Muhammad Amin. Yes, it's super broad. There are how many million Tunisians, right? But it still included him, lafdan, like linguistically included him. When I said give this gift to a Tunisian, it is mutlaq. You could have given it to any Tunisian, ones who live in Tunisia, ones that don't, ones who are half Tunisian. As long as you're Tunisian, you can be given this thing. That's mutlaq. Mujmal, give this to somebody from a particular place in North Africa that I'm not going to mention to you right now. You now don't have enough information to know what that is. You're actually stuck. You're going to have to look at other information to find out what it is. You're going to have to wait for more revelation, find a hadith, find a this, find a that. So we can describe words as mutlaq and words as am. Okay? But when I say, for example, فعل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كذا, أكل كذا, صلى كذا, that's mujmal. That's mujmal. Okay? That is not am, nor is it mutlaq. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ or anybody, the Prophet ﷺ had somebody killed. Okay, so therefore it's halal to have somebody killed. Is that right? No. What was the context? What was the reason? Right? Don't know what that is. The Prophet ﷺ moved in prayer. How much did he move in prayer? Right? The Prophet ﷺ wiped on khufs. What kind of khufs? Right? So you come along and you claim that it is am or that it is mutlaq, right? So am would mean the Prophet ﷺ wiped on every single sock in existence. That is logically impossible, right? Mutlaq, he wiped on some kind of socks and khalas, any socks will do. No. The Prophet ﷺ wiped on some kind of khufs with some kind of specification. I don't know what that is. Does that make sense? Saha fasajada. The Prophet ﷺ forgot, so therefore he did sujood. What did he forget? What did he forget? So that's not it's not anything, nor is it mutlaq. Rather, it's mujmal, meaning I actually don't have enough information to apply it. I'm gonna have to go and try and work that out. And so that's the case with actions. Actions are always mujmal min jihatin ma, right? They're always mujmal min jihatin ma. They always have some level of ambiguity about them that is not 100% clear, right? So I stood up and told the kid off for what? Where did you stand? Which kid? How loud were you? Which words did you use? Right? And so what does that mean then? It means that actions, in terms of their dalala, in terms of their ability to convey meaning, are not very strong compared to words. Right? Actions من حيث دلالتها على المعاني, right? Actions, they are not built there to indicate meaning. Words are in there to indicate meaning. So actions do indicate something, but you need to have a lot of scaffolding. You have to have a lot of things to do things with, right? Does that make sense? Because half the time things are mujmal, right? Half the time things are mujmal min jihatin ma or min jihatin kathira, right? From various different points of view, from sometimes irrelevant points of view, and sometimes super relevant points of view. Go ahead, Farhan.
I want to ask if everything in one of these three categories, mutlaq, mujmal, or am,
Uh,
um, I want to ask that because of you said that, for example, the khufs is mujmal, uh, and I want to ask, is it mujmal until we categorize the khufs, or is it all, it can't be mujmal all the time? So, that's
yeah,
why.
so mujmal is a label that we put on something. It's like imagine, for example, you had an email and you can't respond to it yet because you're waiting for another email to respond to you so that you can respond to that email. So mujmal is a box that we put something in when we don't have enough information to do what we need to do with it. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a problem as opposed to mutlaq or am. That's not really a problem. If that makes sense.
So would the hoofs be mutlaq after we categorize the hoof?
Yeah, mutlaq, for example. So it's not gonna be mutlaq. It's gonna be so. What will happen then is the faqih will come along and do ijtihad and change it into something that is am, and he will say in the Shafi school anything that is like this, right? He will change it from an action. He does his ijtihad and he tries to do bayan of the mujmal, tries to find out what relevant things could be there, and he's gonna do X, Y, and Z. And now he's gonna make a statement. It is halal or valid to wipe upon any khufs that are like this. So he changed it now from an action into a statement, and that statement is universal, right? That's why the rules and right when we phrase things in fiqh, it's like we use universal terms, right? Does that make
Mm,
sense?
yeah.
What I'm saying is most actions are like that, like they're kind of vague from one point of view or another point of view, and sometimes or often they stop us using them because we don't know why it happened and whether it was restricted to that reason, or we don't know how it happened and we don't know this and we don't know that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
jazakallah khair.
So classic mistake of our Salafi brethren is they get sick and tired of traditional fuqaha. Your texts are too difficult, they're really annoying, they're really strict. Okay? Come along and read the hadith, it's easy, right? The hadith is easy. The Prophet ﷺ, he did this. Khalas, I can do this, right? The Prophet ﷺ opened the door while praying. Therefore, I can open the door while praying. Now, it's mujmal min haythul bu'du, right? In respect to how far the Prophet ﷺ was and how many movements he did, it's mujmal. It doesn't explain it. The uneducated comes along, treats it as mutlaq. It doesn't matter. It's any kind of distance. So I can just walk across the room, go and open the door, right? Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, right? What did he say? He said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ate meat from a Jew, and he didn't ask, did he? Right? He ate meat from Jews and didn't ask. Therefore, if we get meat from a Jew or Christian, we don't have to ask, right? So is there a difference? Of course, there's a huge difference. So when the Prophet ﷺ was given meat from a Jew, right? That's mujmal. What kind of Jew, right? Where, when, how? Now you make it so now you turn it from an action. The Prophet ﷺ ate meat offered to him from a Jew without asking whether it was slaughtered properly or not. Therefore, I, in Scotland, in Norway, in Canada, in Australia, can eat meat from any Jew or Christian without asking whether it's halal or not. Can you see that jump? So it's not actually a logical, not logically sound jump. Because the Prophet ﷺ ate certain meat. It was either beef or goat or sheep, right? And it was either this time of day or that time of day. And it was either this or was that. And it was either from a context where Jews and Christians normally slaughtered properly, or in a context that they didn't. So there are so many things that are mujmal. So the faqih is going to go through and say, what of these things are relevant, right? Which of these things are relevant, right? And they're going to say relevant, not relevant, relevant, not relevant, relevant, not relevant. And they say, this hadith is mujmal min hadhihi nahiya, right? From this point of view, it's actually too vague. So they will quote unquote ignore it. And so you'll see many times they'll do that. The hadith kind of gets ignored, right? And you're like, why did they ignore the hadith? Well, it's kind of mujmal, right? The Prophet ﷺ had some dung on his shoe and he just wiped it off. Okay, was it stuck to him when it was dry or was it stuck to him when it was wet? Oh, I don't know. Oh, you say it's mutlaq, like it doesn't matter, any kind of dung, right? All dung, whether it's wet, so it's not any. The Prophet is either one of the two. The dung stuck to his foot when it was dry, or it stuck to his foot when it was wet. If it was wet, he needs to wash it off. If it's dry, you don't have to wash it off. You can just pick it off. So the Prophet ﷺ wiped it on the floor. Okay, that's one thing. So now I'm going to quote unquote ignore the hadith and say no, you have to wash it off. Say what the hadith says. The Prophet ﷺ just wiped it off. Yeah, but that was mujmal from this point of view. It wasn't clear. Was it this scenario or that scenario? Right? So you can have countless scenarios like this, right? Countless scenarios where the untrained will come along, take the hadith wholesale because the Prophet ﷺ did, right? I want to see what the Prophet ﷺ said. And in fact, our ulama, they go to such an extent that they say, al-umum fil mahki la fil hikaya. Right? Al-umum fil mahki la fil hikaya. The umum is to be taken from the words that are quoted from the Prophet ﷺ, not the paraphrasing of the Sahabi. Okay? So when the Prophet ﷺ said, Naha Rasulullah ﷺ, Ibn Umar said, I believe it's Ibn Umar, Naha Rasulullah ﷺ an bay'il gharar. The Prophet ﷺ forbade vague contracts, right? That's very different to saying vague contracts are haram. So if the Prophet ﷺ said vague contracts are haram, that's easy. That means you all I have to do is say, is your contract that you're doing now is vague? Yes. Okay, therefore it's haram. It's easy. But in reality, that's not what the Prophet ﷺ said. That's what the Prophet ﷺ did. So I say Ibn Umar, I believe it's from Ibn Umar. If somebody can correct me. Can you please tell me what the Prophet ﷺ said and did? So then we have this issue and 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 this issue. But I come along to that statement, Naha Rasulullah and Bay al-Gharar. It looks am, Bay al-Gharar, vague contracts. But it's not actually am because it's an action. He forbade it. Well, so did he forbid this contract and then you extrapolated that principle, right? Is that your ijtihad or is that actually what he said? So there's a big difference between the Prophet saying, I hereby forbid vague contracts versus the Prophet forbade vague contracts. Because what it means is there are maybe 10 scenarios, specific scenarios, that whoever it is was listening extracted a general principle from. I don't want to listen to your extraction. I want to see the actual material. Does that make sense? Right? Similarly with judgments. قضى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بكذا. Prophet ruled. What was the context? So I look at the words, it seems قضى بالشفعة للجار. The Prophet ruled that the neighbor has a right to do that. Well, the Prophet ﷺ cannot have ruled for the generic neighbor because the generic neighbor doesn't exist. The Prophet ﷺ ruled in certain situations for certain neighbors in certain contexts that they could have shufa, right? They could, intercept a sale and become the buyer instead of the other person. So we say the ulama say we can't use that. That's mujmal now. I don't know what the variables were. I can't really use it. So what I have to start doing now is that now I have to start putting things together. I'm going to use this as a piece of my evidence and try and put together things together. Say, well, assuming this, assuming this, assuming this, assuming this, maybe that. Come up and do ijtihad. Basically reconstruct, so to speak, right? It's almost like the color of the dinosaur. What color skin do you think dinosaur had? Right? I don't know. Let's reconstruct it based on what's reasonable and go with that. Right? That's what the scholar is going to do. So when we're dealing with the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, it's much harder than dealing with the words. Does that make sense?
Yes, Sheikh.
Okay. Now we're going to go on to something else many of us have heard before. The Prophet ﷺ never did this. Okay, fantastic. So the Prophet ﷺ did or the Prophet ﷺ did not. The Prophet ﷺ did this. What does that tell us? The Prophet ﷺ married more than 4 wives in one go. Does it make it wajib?
No.
No. What's the
Allah
hukm?
أعلم.
Muhammad Amin. Allah yazawiju, inshallah. Right? Muhammad Amin gets married to 11 women at the same time, following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. What's the hukm?
It's not permissible because
بالضبط.
It's haram. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ did it and it's haram for us. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ did it and it was makruh for us. Like what? Like urinating standing. Right, like other scenarios. Trying to think of other scenarios, like urinating standing, makruh for us. The Prophet ﷺ did it, and it is permissible for us. Like living in Saudi Arabia. Like, is it sunnah to live in Saudi Arabia? As far as I know, I don't think so. Allahu a'lam. Right? The Prophet ﷺ lived in an adobe hut. The Prophet ﷺ he liked dubba, right? Certain type of thing. Prophet ﷺ rode a donkey, right? So it doesn't make it, it means it's jaiz, right? The Prophet ﷺ does things, it makes it jaiz, right? The Prophet ﷺ breathed, the Prophet ﷺ walked, the Prophet ﷺ rode, the Prophet ﷺ, all sorts of things. It's jaiz, right? So it could be haram, it could be makruh, it could be jaiz, it could be sunnah, like what?
Siwak.
Siwak, right? And the Prophet, and what else? And then the Prophet ﷺ did it in his wajib, like praying 5 times a day. So, min haythu huwa wa min haythu dalalatuhu, right? The fi'l doesn't mean that much. When you just take the action by itself without any context, the action by itself doesn't really tell us that much. Because it could be haram, it could be makruh, it could be mubah, it could be sunnah, it could be wajib. Right? In itself. Now, combined with other things, the Prophet ﷺ says, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. Follow the way I do Hajj. So now we're going to start looking at him. Hang on a minute. Eyes, put the camera on now. How is he doing Hajj? Oh, he did this, he did this, he did this. Now it's relevant because there was words involved. صَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي. Pray as you've seen me pray. Oh, now that's relevant, right? So when you combine it with other contexts and with other words, suddenly it becomes, there's now dalala. Otherwise, in itself, the action by itself it's fairly weak in terms of its dalala, in terms of what it tells us exactly to do, right? So this is what's your name again, Enrico?
Abdul Jalil.
Abdul Jalil. Just give me 1 second, okay? I want to finish your point and we'll come to your question, okay? So now we're going to flip it. Say the Prophet ﷺ did not do it. The Prophet ﷺ did not steal. So not stealing is that could be wajib, right? Well, the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, and stealing is, what's the hukm on stealing?
حرام.
Haram. The Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, and it's makruh. Leaving tahajjud after having established a habit of doing it, for example. Mubah. The Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, and it's mubah. Like what?
Using a phone.
Using a phone, for example. Many things, right? The Prophet ﷺ did it, and it's sunnah. Arguably
o'clock,
tarawih,
maybe.
right? You could make the example. That's a bit of a problematic one, though. But like fasting the what is it? Fasting the ninth of Ashura, the ninth of Muharram, right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, if I'm alive next year, I'll do it, right? So doing the ninth. He didn't do it, and it's wajib, right? Like studying Arabic language, critiquing hadith, creating the ulum al-shar'iyyah, developing software that protects people from the haram. There's all sorts of infinite things that are obligatory that are not, that the Prophet didn't do, right? So again, min haythu huwa fi'lun or min haythu huwa tarku fi'lin la yadullu ala kathir, right? It doesn't indicate that much. So it could be obligatory and the Prophet never did it. It could be sunnah and the Prophet never did it. It could be this, it could be that, right? So in itself, compare this to when the Prophet ﷺ says, I'll give an example. Here as in a contrast, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ma ubina, whatever, ma ubina min hayawan min hayyin fahuwa mayta, right? Or kama qal, whatever is taken off a living being is considered carrion. Okay, so the Shafi'is, they say what was the context is that the people were poor and they were cutting pieces off live animal, cut fat off live animal, the hump of a camel, fry it and eat it, the fat on the back of a sheep, cut it off and eat it, right? We need the animal alive for its milk, but we'll cut a bit off, right? So the process, that was the context. So the Prophet said anything that is taken off a living animal is like its carrion. So the Shafi'is, they say, oh, cat hair's najas. Okay, why? Well, cat hair didn't come off a living. Did the cat hair not come off a living being? Yeah. So notice how we jump from one statement to another rule. So Abdul Jalil has a cat in his house right now, and the cat sheds sheds cat hair. According to the Shafis, relied upon position Shafi school, that is najis. You can't eat it. Okay, why? Because the Prophet said this. So we jumped immediately from one statement straight to the hukm on the cat's hair that just came off the cat's back in Abdul Jalil's house right now. Very direct. As opposed to the Prophet did this, right? I saw the Prophet do this on Hajj, combined it with the fact that the Prophet said, "Khudu anni manasikakum," follow me in the rituals. Bang! Now I'm going to say it's this, right? But it's actually possible that he did that as a sunnah as well. So I'm still a bit stuck, right? We have a problem. The Prophet did it in prayer, and the default is pray as you see me pray, and now I'm seeing him pray, but some of these things are sunnah as well, right? So it's actually tricky. So dealing with actions is quite a tricky process. It's not as direct and easy as dealing with something that is that as a word. Does that make sense? Go ahead, Abdul Jalil. Abdul Jalil, you there?
Sorry, I was muted.
Go ahead.
Uh, yeah, I wanted to ask, like, so basically you're saying if the Prophet ﷺ did something that doesn't indicate anything by itself, it could even be haram for us because you
Mhm.
gave the example of more than four wives, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Jazakallah
Yep.
khair.
Yeah. Now, that's a bit of a hyperbole, right? It's a bit of a hyperbole. You say, well, khalas, okay, the default is not like that. But I'm trying to make the point that it's not as simple as people think it is, right? So, and certainly min bab talaq, the Prophet ﷺ never did that. That doesn't really mean that much, right? And then even in terms of ibadat, right? Like in terms of ibadat, there's like tons of examples of the Sahaba doing things, right? Ibn Umar, who was one of the most careful people in following the Prophet ﷺ, adding to the talbiyah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So you think of all people, Ibn Umar would stick exactly to what the Prophet ﷺ did and not go any more or less, right? But what did he do? He added to this. Sahaba so added to this, right? So that's why we have this whole issue of the issue of bid'ah, right? Is that we'll have kind of two camps. And there's a very good book, just write it down if you don't have time to read it, whatever. It's called Mafhum al-Bid'ah. I have it in front of me, yeah, because I want to teach it. Mafhum al-Bid'ah by a scholar called Al-Arfaj, right? Mafhum al-Bid'ah by a scholar called Al-Arfaj. Ain Ra Fa Jim Arfaj, right? Saudi scholar. Really, really good book. Very balanced, very useful book, right? And so when you say the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, so and it's an act of worship, therefore it's a bid'ah, it's not really true, right? You see tons of the Sahaba doing all sorts of things, right? So the way that those who are conservative will get around it, if you're being conservative, is you will say, we'll give that license. Basically, we'll open the door to a bid'ah hasana to the Sahaba and Tabi'een, and that's it. We'll just close the door, right? Min bab sadda dhara'i, so as to block the means, right? We'll let, for example, the Sahaba and Tabi'een invent Taraweeh and establish the 20 rakahs, for example, or more or less, right? But that's it, right? So like Imam Shafi'i, he mentions that perfect example. Like, did the Prophet ﷺ ever pray 20 rakahs Taraweeh? Like, I don't think so. There's a weak hadith about it, but that's like, so Imam Shafi sees it as a bid'ah, but it's a bid'ah hasana, right? Imam Shafi mentioning fasting 3 days before Salatul Istisqa because one of the early rulers told people to do that. So that's a bid'ah. Like, it's not just once; it's now like an established thing that it's sunnah now to do that, and then on top of that, it can become obligatory if the ruler tells you to do it, right? And so there's many things like that, countless things that you see people doing prayers, people doing this, people doing that, right? Um, the other day, I was reading a hadith in Bulugh al-Maram. I don't know where it is now. It's like Aisha radiallahu anha saying, one hadith from her that the Prophet ﷺ never prayed duha, but I pray duha. Right? The Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, but I do it. You know what I'm saying? It's a kind of like strange, or like, the Prophet ﷺ asking Sayyidina Bilal, why do I hear your footsteps in paradise? Oh, because I pray. Every time I pray, make wudu, I pray 2 rakats. Well, did the Prophet ﷺ show us to do that? Right? So if you want to be conservative, they would say, but it's different. Sayyidina Bilal did a bid'ah hasana. He created an act of worship, which was praying 2 rakahs every after you making wudu. The Prophet ﷺ confirmed it, so made it sunnah. Okay, but it's kind of that kind of precludes anybody doing anything else. You know what I mean, right? So that's a bit difficult there, Allahu A'lam. But the whole idea, Imam Ahmad, did the Prophet ﷺ pray 300 rakats? So Imam Ahmad, after his injury, right, he prayed 300 rakats a night. Before that, he's praying like 1,000. So did the Prophet ﷺ pray 1,000 rakats every night? No. So Imam Ahmad is sahib bid'ah, astaghfirullah, right? So, among many other things. So it's غير دقيق. It's not very accurate. Right? The Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, therefore it's a bid'ah. It's not. Right? What you got to say is غير مأمور به. That's what you got to say. right? So in fiqh, we're talking about ma'mur bihi, the discussion we had last week. Is this ma'mur bihi or not? Because if it's not ma'mur bihi, it's not valid, right? If it's not commanded, then it's not valid, right? So when you that's what we're talking about. Okay. So when dealing with the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, the problem is what? Al-ijmal. Al-ijmal, right? It's fi hayyiz al-ijmal. I don't really know what's going on here. So I'm not really sure. There's lots of things that can be dropped out when you mention something, right? Like I went to America, when, how, this, what's going on? When we narrate events and actions, there's lots of things that are dropped out. And some of these things are relevant, some things are not relevant. So what that means is I have to do a lot of reconstructing, right? A lot of reconstructing, right? Where's our Turkish brothers here? Any Turkish brothers here today? Farhan, you're Turkish, right?
Yeah,
Right? So when you watch Etro, right, that's a perfect historical representation of the people of that time, right?
not really.
And their accent is 100% whatever they would have spoken at that time.
I don't think so.
Not at all, right? It's all a bit silly,
Yeah,
right? It makes you feel good, but it's a bit silly, okay? You know, you're all probably all too old for this. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, right? So Kevin Costner, right? The so Robin Hood spoke with an American accent. It's like Habibi, right? Of course not. So we reconstruct things, right? And sometimes they're interesting. Like they did that film, I don't know, I didn't watch it. It's called The Passion of Christ, right, with Mel Gibson, right? So they tried to reconstruct it, like how did they speak Aramaic at the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam? That's pretty cool, right? But again, there's all these gray areas, and you have to reconstruct the film based on this and this and this, right? It's not super easy. There's a lot of things that you're going to have to assume, like assuming this, assuming that. It's kind of difficult, right? So that's what we have to do. We have to do a lot of reconstructing, as opposed to with the words. I have the words, right? I have the word. This is what he said. Okay, and then I can start working with the words. But what I have to do with an action is I have to do the following. I have to get the action, get the verb, do my ijtihad to reconstruct. Okay, reconstruct. And then edit, once I've reconstructed it, edit as a scholar what's relevant, what's not relevant, and then extract from it a universal principle. Does that make sense? So I get the action, reconstruct based on what would make sense. I do ijtihad, which might be right, might be wrong. Do my ijtihad, try and say this, and then come up with a principle, right? So I give you an example. In the Shafi'i school, so we have the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed 2 rakahs of Dhuhr or Asr. I can't remember what it was. Different narrations. One narration mentions that he turns and he seems concerned. Okay? And then Dhul Yadayn says, Ya Rasulullah, did you shorten the prayer or not? And he says, no. And he says, well, you must have because this. And then he says, are you right? Is he speaking the truth? And they said, yes. So then the Prophet ﷺ comes, Yajurru dhaylahu, right? He's walking kind of like kind of angrily upset, like, wow, man, I forgot, and then he prays 2 rakahs, gives salams, etc., right? And explains what to do. So now we have to reconstruct this event. Did the Prophet ﷺ turn away from the Qibla? Did he not? Did he walk far? Did he not? Did he speak? Did he not? So you say he didn't speak. Did he know he was in prayer? Did he not? Did he forget? Did he not? Reconstruct, okay? So then the Shafi'is, we say, if you gave salams and you moved around excessively, it would not be excused. It would not be excused. So looking at the hadith, there's a hadith kind of gives the sense that he moved, right? But they're like, it's difficult for us to reconstruct this hadith accurately. So the Shafis would say, yes, if you spoke, fine. Okay? And if it was a short time. We know that he spoke and we know the short time. Could it have been longer than a short time? We don't know, right? Maybe he said more words. We don't know. So they're going to reconstruct and they're going to come up with these principles. If you do that in the prayer in a short time, you can enter the prayer again and finish it off with sujood al-sahw. if you speak in the prayer while not knowing you in the prayer, it's excused, right? So that's an assumption now. So that's an assumption. We made this universal principle. So they did an analogy. They came up, but they said that applies to anybody apparently, right? And there's obviously other evidence for that as well. But they say if he spoke in the prayer accidentally, it would be excused, right? If there's only a few words. So they're trying to reconstruct it. But notice they said actions are not accepted. You can't move around a lot in the prayer. Moving around a lot in the prayer, mutlaqan will break the prayer, right? It'll break the prayer, even in this scenario. So they kind of quote unquote ignore the hadith. Now, Taqiyuddin al-Subki and Imam Nawawi, their ikhtiyar is you can move around in prayer. And therefore, anybody who accidentally moved around excessively in the prayer will be excused, right? They went off on a tangent there. But notice how the majority of the Shafi'is, and you're probably going to find this across the madhahib, when you move around a lot, like he left the masjid, went to the car, came back, right? They're going to say, no, you can't do that. Why? Because we don't really know how much the Prophet ﷺ moved around, right? So therefore, when we're reconstructing it, it's difficult, right? So then what might be possible is suddenly ignored, if that makes sense. So now your Salafi friend comes along and says, no, the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed 2 rak'ahs. The hadith doesn't mention how close he was to the musalla. The Prophet doesn't mention how many actions, it just mentions it in a general way. So he treats it as anyone who finishes the prayer after 2 rak'ahs may enter it again once he is confident that he needs to complete it. He treats it as anybody because he sees that there's no quyud, there's no criterion in the hadith. But that's not how the scholars work with it. They don't deal with the mujmal as am. The mujmal is vague, is problem, is a dark room which I can kind of see some things in, but I don't really know what's in there. So you ask me, tell me what is in there. So well, for sure, there's something in there, and for sure there's at least one kid. I don't know if there's 2 kids. I don't know if there's something else, right? Does that make sense? So we're not saying that the Prophet ﷺ didn't move around a lot. We're saying I don't know that he moved around a lot, so therefore I don't have a license to let people just move around in prayer as an accident. So we just have to leave it like that because it's vague, because it's unclear, because it's a dark room that we can't see into very well, because it's only actions, right? I want to mention another example of this. Ibn Mundhir, right? I'm Shafi, of course. I'm talking about the Shafi school. So Ibn Mundhir, his opinion is that you can recite Quran in janaba. Okay, you can recite Quran in janaba, and so he has 2 proofs. Number one, the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, he would that nothing would stop him from reciting Quran apart from janaba. He says the hadith is weak. Okay, he says the hadith is weak. Number one. Number two, he says that the Prophet ﷺ كان يذكر الله على كل أحواله أو على كل أحيانه. The Prophet ﷺ used to remember Allah, make dhikr of Allah in all of his states, in all of his times. So the hadith is universal. Dhikr is permissible in all states and all times. The hadith that says that the Prophet ﷺ would only stop doing that in janaba is weak, therefore it's halal. Where's the problem? The issue about the hadith being weak, that's a hadith issue. No, not a problem. You want to say the hadith is weak, that's your opinion, that's fine. The other problem is a problem. Because you say the Prophet ﷺ used to remember Allah in all states. وَأَلَيْسَ الْقُرْآنَ ذِكْرًا لِلَّهِ أَلَيْسَ الْقُرْآنُ ذِكْرًا لِلَّهِ? Right? Isn't reciting the Quran a type of dhikr? Yes. But there's a difference saying he used to remember Allah in all of his states, as opposed to dhikr of Allah is permissible in all states. So dhikr of Allah includes the Quran. But he used to do dhikr of Allah is mujmal. It is not mutlaq. Okay? So it's like saying, I used to eat meat in Germany. Does that include pork? Linguistically? No. Because I don't know what meat you only ate meat at a certain time. There are these 5,000 days that you ate meat on. And it was only from this cow or this sheep or this thing or this thing. It's not all inclusive. Right? Eating meat in Germany is halal versus I used to eat meat in Germany. Or I used to always eat tons of meat in Germany. That doesn't include pork. That's not logical to make that assumption. So when you say the Prophet ﷺ used to make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and dhikr is a form of dhikr of Allah is inclusive, that you've now taken an action and you made it am, and that's batil. You can't do that. And then why is this a useful discussion? Because Ibn Mundhir is on the same page as us, so we can talk about this. Right? So we have a useful discussion. He's a Shafi, we're a Shafi, the same usul. We can talk about it meaningfully and usefully. The issue now then, here's the problem. This is why a mujtahid, right? Quote me on this. The mujtahid needs a madhab more than anybody else. What does that mean? Meaning he needs a research system. So somebody has no research system, right? And they're like, well, the Prophet did this, and there's no, why are you qualifying it? Right? Where'd you get these qualifications from? Why are you making it so strict? Right? Prophet ate meat, I can eat meat. Prophet got married, I can get married. Prophet killed people, I can kill people. Right? Your problem is you're treating the al-fi'l as a'am, and the fi'l la ya'um aslan. Right? It is khas min, it's always a specific number of vague issues or specific number of things. Right? I used to sleep at my aunt's house. You only slept a certain number of times at your aunt. It's not an all-inclusive event. Right? Does that make sense? So can you see how dangerous this can be when you get a kana Rasulullah yaf'al kada, kana this, right? And maybe give some homework. Somebody who would like to do this, Muhammad Amin or somebody else, look in the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad. Okay, look at the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad and see what Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, this is in the beginning somewhere, right? In the beginning of the prayer, it's like somewhere in the first 50 pages, something like that, the Muslim, right? There's a question put to Ibrahim al-Nakha'i about Raf al-Yadayn. Okay, about Raf al-Yadayn. Raising your hands in the prayer. So when you say كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يرفع يديه قبل ركوعه وبعد ركوعه وبعد الركعة الثانية, does that mean the Prophet ﷺ used to raise his hands before ruku' and after ruku' and after coming out the second rak'ah? Does it mean he always did that? See, I see the words kana, right? But it's not actually am, is it? It means that he did it. But did he always do it? Right? And is it possible, like if I take a statement, for example, you can eat any meat in Germany. You can't eat any meat in Germany. That's a conflict. Okay? I used to